and thanks for those that are already putting their name and organization in the chat. My name is Allie, and I'm the Assistant Planner on the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program here at OPR, and I'm joined today by my colleague Braden, who manages the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. As we're getting started, and if you haven't already, please put your name and organization in the chat. Also, please note that this is being recorded and will be shared publicly, so if you'd prefer not to have your name in the chat or on the recording, feel free to just rename yourself to be a blank name so that you're not included on the recording. I'm also on tech support today, so feel free to send me a message if you have any questions or tech support needs. As we're gathering, please note that we have live closed captioning. To access it, you should see a bottom bar on Zoom with the reaction and share screen icons. Go ahead and press the button that says Show Captions. I want to start this meeting by acknowledging that the state of California exists on the occupied territory of over 110 federally recognized tribes and over 70 non-federally recognized tribes. This land has been stewarded by Indigenous people since time immemorial. We acknowledge the critical importance of these lands and waters to the Indigenous people of California today. We at the Office of Planning and Research join you all from Sacramento, California, on the ancestral territory of the Southern Maidu, Valley Miwok, Patwin, and Nisenan tribes. We're a community that includes a people with wide ranges of access needs. Some of us get our needs met by day-to-day dominant culture, while others do not. We'd like to cultivate a space that works together as a community to listen to access needs and also works together towards meeting them. With this in mind, we have a couple reminders and requests as we start the meeting. First, please say your name before you speak. Second, it's okay to turn off your video and still be present. It's also okay to be here and not be feeling 100%. Help people on the phone or with visual impairments understand what's happening on video or chat by saying it out loud. It's okay to moderate how much you want to interact in our meeting today. And if you need to take a break throughout the meeting, that's totally okay. If anyone has an access request that would support your participation in the call or in the group more generally, we invite you to either share it to me privately via chat or to the group as a whole. Okay, a little bit more about what we're going to get up to today. Right now we're in the intro portion for the next couple minutes. Then Braden and I are going to give an overview for about half an hour about the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program. And then we'll have about 45 minutes for question and answer if you have any questions already, even though we're just at the start of the application period. And the last 10 minutes or so, we'll wrap up. It's important to note that future workshops will be a little bit more complicated. We might have some more bells and whistles, but as we're just getting started, we're keeping it pretty simple with a broad program overview. Okay, if everyone's feeling good, I'm going to go ahead and get started with a program overview. So you all are here in the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program Workshop, and we're so grateful you're here today. For a little bit of context, the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Grant Program is one of 3 grants that lives in the ICARP grant family. So ICARP means Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resilience Program. So besides our program, there's also the Regional Resilience Grant Program, or RRGP, and the Adaptation Planning Grant Program, or APGP. It's important to note that APGP just finished up their public comment period for second round funding, and they'll be releasing their application for funding very soon. So if you're interested in adaptation broadly beyond just the extreme heat scheme of things, I definitely recommend you explore the Adaptation Planning Grant Program. Okay. Digging in a little more to what our program means specifically, the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program will offer planning and implementation grants for both extreme heat relief, so short-term, and building long-term resilience to extreme heat. The Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program aims to support a statewide movement, so everywhere across the state, to build resilience to extreme heat, and we plan to do this by doing a couple things. First, supporting placemaking and placekeeping. Second, both supporting the immediate response to extreme heat in the moment and building long-term climate resilience. Third, sustainable workforce and job creation. And finally, the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program aims to protect the health of Californians who are most vulnerable to extreme heat as our top priority. Oops, Okay. Let's see, I'll do this first. Okay. So along with our vision, which is kind of broad, we have a couple values that we really want to highlight. As we're just getting started with this workshop, I'm just going to put up all our values that we decided on from our engagement, but in future workshops, I'll dive in a little more and do kind of a focus on one value for the particular day. But just to run through it, since we're just getting started, the values of this program, which are both the values that went into creating the guidelines and also the values that we're seeking in the projects that we fund, are place and belonging, Indigenous land stewardship, inclusion and language justice, harm reduction and healing, enterprise and job creation, co-benefits and systems thinking, supporting technology development and innovative design, and finally, community resilience for all hazards. So recognizing that extreme heat does not exist in a bubble and folks are facing a myriad of climate crisis and other challenges every day. And our program can help by first tackling extreme heat, approach some of those other topics as well. Okay, so that's where we're coming from in terms of our values, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we got there. So in the spring of 2023, so a little less than a year ago, we hosted 9 listening sessions to better understand the needs of California regions and communities. And then last fall, we also hosted 4 public sessions to get feedback on our draft guidelines. Between these 13 sessions, we received about 1,000 registrations, so we're really glad that a lot of people were able to provide input as we were shaping the program and kind of finding our values. So you might guess, but listening sessions have been instrumental in shaping our guidelines so far. A few of the lessons we've learned so far, specifically related to how extreme heat is impacting Californians, is that extreme heat can impact people really differently depending on how they're most vulnerable. So not everyone's experiencing extreme heat in the same way. Despite this, extreme heat has serious impacts on the mental and physical health for many, if not all, Californians. A little more specific is that folks have really limited access to shade, green space, and public resources. So the design of buildings, neighborhoods, and cities can increase the impact of extreme heat. What this means specifically is that limited shade, limited green space, and limited access to public transportation makes cities hotter and makes extreme heat events more dangerous for the people living inside them. From our listening sessions, we also learned that many people lack air conditioning or proper weatherization, which is a significant challenge in extreme heat events. Even if they do have air conditioning technology, it might be hard to pay utility bills to run an air conditioner, or power disruption is endangering people who, even if they can pay for it and even if they have the technology, they're losing access to air conditioning, electric-powered mobility devices, and medical equipment. On the other side of things, we also asked folks in our public engagement how we can shape our grant program to best meet the needs of different communities. So a couple of the things we learned is that folks from our engagement really clarified that there's a need for specific funding set aside for planning for extreme heat, physical infrastructure for extreme heat, and public services for extreme heat. We also learned that funded projects should prioritize access and functional needs communities, including people whose primary language is not English, was a main topic for us. Third, we learned that partnership requirements can really strengthen a project and bring people together, but also that these requirements can be a barrier for small, rural, and underserved applicants seeking grant funding. And finally, as I'm sure many of you are well aware if you've sought out grant funding in the past, there is a strong need for a simple grant application, as well as application support and technical assistance. Okay, so that's where we're coming from. We hosted these 13 listening sessions last year in 2023, and out of that drafted our values and vision, and I shared a little bit about what we learned. So kind of coming out of that, we were able to draft our guidelines, which came out about 2 weeks ago when we opened our application. So I'm going to walk through quickly our application timeline and some of the details of what it's like to apply. Actually, that's for Braden. Sorry, Braden. I'll pass it to you. I got too excited. I just wanted to tell everyone.
Awesome. Great job, Allie. So hi, everyone. Braden K with the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience team with Allie. And so right here, what you're witnessing is the program kickoff. Is the application period. We had the program kickoff and listening sessions last spring. we had a public comment period where we released the draft guidelines and were able to get feedback from individuals and organizations across the state. I see some of you that submitted that feedback here today, which is great to see, and really appreciate all of the public comment that we got back. We will be publishing later this winter a review of the changes that we made based on the public feedback that we received. We now are in our application period, and then we anticipate awards announcements for our first round this summer. So we're really excited about that. And then we'll know more after the May revised budget as to the logistics and potential for a round 2 or round 3 of this program. Next slide. So in terms of who this grant opportunity is for, local public entities such as school districts, counties, cities are eligible for this grant, as are California Native American tribes, community-based organizations, and related nonprofits, public academic institutions such as higher ed, individual higher ed institutions, and also coalitions of nonprofits. Next slide. We do have different roles. So we are expecting every application to have a single entity that is the lead applicant that we will contract with and that the money will be transferred to. Then there is the potential to have co-applicants, meaning that they're also receiving money, that are part of the scope of work, and have clear roles to play, and a letter of support that they have to submit saying what it is that they're going to be doing on the grant. We have the contributor role. So that's a role where we are allowing for a little bit more flexibility in terms of not knowing that organization is going to be in the project, but allowing for some flexibility as to exactly what their scope of work is. You don't have to know it at the time of application. Obviously, we want to know the general activity or the general reason that they're on the grant, but we wanted to create a grant type that allowed for a paid role on the grant without having to be a co-applicant and having to submit as detailed a project scope and list of activities as the co-applicants do. And then we also have supporters. So those are non-paid participants in the project who could play a role in the project, whether it's helping with championing the project or communicating about the project, or and we are requiring a letter of support for that to show that. And if you have supporters on your project, it shows there's this sort of broader support for the project, and you're trying to think about a broader coalition that's helping you move this work forward. Next slide. We do have funding targets as part of our program. So both California Native American tribes and projects that are benefiting disadvantaged communities will receive points to add to their scoring criteria. So Ali is going to describe the scoring criteria later in our presentation. And because these are two groups that we want to make sure that grant funding is getting to, there is a point advantage for these two groups. That does not mean that if your project is not in a DAC, or is not a native, or you're not a lead applicant as a Native American tribe, you still should apply for the program. But we are targeting these two grant types and have a point addition for these two grant types. Next slide. Whoop, back. So we, did, as Ali said, a lot of listening about what Californians need in terms of supporting the resilience to extreme heat movement, both in terms of heat relief that saves lives in the next several summers, as well as long-term heat resilience that builds more resilient communities over the coming decades, and supports that longer-term resilience. And so what we try to do here is create several different kinds of grant vehicles that allow for the different needs that exist in California, and the different needs of different types of organizations and jurisdictions. So we have both a small planning grant and a large planning grant, and then a small implementation and a large implementation grant that allows for some flexibility. So we haven't had an OPR grant program that's had this amount of flexibility in terms of offering these smaller grants, and we feel like it's really important. There's a lot of communities that are just getting started on extreme heat work and need to either show some immediate small wins with small implementation grants, or they need to start some of that capacity building and starting some of those conversations. And so the small grants really afford folks to do that. You will notice that with this grant round, it's a $20 million total for this first grant round. We're hoping to have future rounds with more money, and we're hoping to have future rounds that have more money available for implementation. We really wanted to make sure that there was an adequate amount of planning done in this first round. So that's why you see $8 million in planning grants in this first round. We really wanted to make sure that this first cohort had a significant number of planning grants. Just to clarify, you do not need to do a planning grant in advance of implementation. So, we certainly hope to set this up that folks that apply for planning grants, there will be money available in future rounds for you to do implementation projects. But as of right now, you can do implementation projects without having done a heat plan in advance of the implementation project. So now I'm going to walk into a little bit of specifics on each of the 4 grants. So small planning grants, these are really grants to help support beginning activities and starting to help your community, jurisdiction, region in working on extreme heat. So this can be working on community awareness campaigns and staff training and workforce development, just to start to get communities to figure out, well, what are the things that we need to know how to do to prepare for extreme heat events? What are the capacities that we need? So that's one area in capacity development. There's an opportunity for pre-planning activities. So making sure that you're doing asset mapping to understand what areas of your jurisdiction or region need to be cooled, or what assets can be used for cooling and shade and heat relief. Opportunities to do some initial engagement, opportunities for a vulnerability assessment to better understand where are the hottest areas in your jurisdiction or region, or in your tribe. So so that's the pre-planning. And then there's also the opportunity to do small scale planning and project development. So if you want to plan for a larger infrastructure project or for a larger program, that you can do use the small planning grant. So if you were interested in potentially starting a heat ambassador program in your region, you could use a small planning grant to start to get organized for how you would develop that program over the long term. Or if you were going to do a school district urban greening implementation project, you could use a small planning grant to help you create an urban greening, an urban cooling and shade plan for implementing in your school district before you got started with implementation. So, or if you had an individual streetscape, for example, and you wanted to do a shade plan for that streetscape, the small planning grant would be appropriate for that. So that's really, we're really open to the types of grants that come in through small planning. The key piece, one of the other key pieces is the large grants were requiring you to have a partner in the grant, so that you have a co-applicant that works with you the whole time on the project together, so that if you're a CBO, you have a local government with you, or if you're a local government, you have a CBO working with you. The small planning grants, however, allow you to create that partnership over the course of the grant. So you can be a single entity CBO, asking for a small planning grant in order to develop those necessary partnerships that would be necessary for a large planning grant or a large implementation grant. So that's another critical component of the small planning grant, is it's really there to allow you to create partnerships, create community visions for what it means to tackle both heat relief and long-term resilience to extreme heat. And it's really meant for those communities that are just starting the process, or just thinking about early stages of implementation and need some planning resources to be ready for implementation. Next slide. Large planning grants. So these grants are really for communities that have partners identified, are ready to do larger scale planning. So that includes creating a heat action plan for your city. That also includes creating heat components of larger plans, whether you're creating a heat component of your safety element in your general plan, or a heat component of your hazard mitigation plan. There's opportunities to sort of either create a standalone heat plan or create a heat plan that fits into another planning process that you're working on. There's also the opportunity to conduct large scale studies. So really like large scale vulnerability assessments, large scale heat assessments, to really understand what the state of play is for extreme heat in your community or jurisdiction or tribe, and use that as the baseline for a large planning process. So these are really, larger in scale in terms of the amount of money. Definitely grants that will take up to the 30 months that we're expecting these grants to take place. The small planning grants might be shorter term grants, depending on how you decide to design them. But the large planning grants are really for getting ready to put in large scale infrastructure, getting ready to prioritize infrastructure investment, getting ready to create big new programs. That's orchestrating existing programs around extreme heat amongst several different partners. The large planning grant really is an opportunity for that much more complex partnership work and much more complex planning needed for large scale implementation. Next slide. So then the implementation grants. So similarly to the planning grants, the small grant does not require a co-applicant, whereas the large grant does either require an applicant or a justification as to why you don't have a co-applicant. And we kind of see the small implementation grants as something that's having as a single site. So like a single streetscape, a single school, a single building, or a single technology type, like a Ramada implementation in a park system, or a water fountain implementation in a downtown area, sort of a single type of implementation. Whereas the large implementation grants are really meant to combine projects. So combine different types of infrastructure, combine infrastructure with communications projects, really trying to combine different approaches into a large implementation effort. So next slide. California is one of the first states in the country to have a statewide heat action plan. That action plan the first one was in 2013. The update was in 2022. There's 4 tracks to that action plan. And so we've been using those 4 tracks to organize the different types of implementation activities that can be funded. By no means is this an exhaustive list. There are other types of things. We just wanted to give you some highlights. So track A is really around building public awareness and notification. So that can be putting on neighborhood events to make sure people are aware of community resilience and extreme heat. education programming to teach students how to become climate ambassadors and extreme heat ambassadors. There's work that's been done around cool buddy programs, especially with like out in communities with a lot of older adults, to make sure that people are checking in each other on extreme heat emergencies. There's opportunity to bring in arts and culture to help support awareness and community connection that can help with becoming more resilient to extreme heat. So lots of opportunities on that public awareness side of the work. Then track B is strengthening community services and response. So that can be mutual aid, that can be supporting the creation of heat packs that have items that help people survive a heat wave, that can have to do with toolkits to help people become more energy secure and resilient to extreme heat in their homes. That can do with, there is another grant from the Strategic Growth Council around community resilience centers. Our program really isn't designed to fund full community resilience centers, but we could fund activities that are happening in an existing community resilience center that have to do with heat relief and cooling, that could help support your community services and response efforts. Then next slide. Then we have track C, which is the built environment resilience. So supporting use of cool and smart surfaces, shade structures, water fountains, splash pads, any kind of infrastructure that supports making the built environment more resilient to extreme heat. And then track D, a very related track, is utilizing nature-based solutions. So tree plantings, cool community gardens, that community gardens explicitly designed to be cooling refuges, green stormwater infrastructure, that's infrastructure that's designed to take stormwater and create vegetated areas and shaded areas that aren't reliant on potable water. Nature-based playgrounds, so those are playgrounds that are using nature to help create more cool playgrounds and not using materials that easily get hot in a heat wave, as well as cool ecosystems work. So ecosystems work that can shade streams or help shade critical ecosystems that are important for people. Those are also eligible activities in that nature-based solutions space. So next slide. So that's the grant overview. And we're happy to we know that there's starting to be some questions. We'll get to the question and answer component of this as soon. We're going to ask you to use the question and answer function and not the chat function, but we'll get to that soon after Allie goes over the application process.
Great, thanks, Braden. So just to share a little bit more about a detailed timeline and exactly what applying for this program looks like. Okay, so here's how our application process will go. We opened on January 29th, and sometime between January 29th and April 23rd, applicants will submit a pre-application interest form. Even though the pre-application interest form isn't due until April 23rd, we encourage you to do it as soon as possible. For those seeking application technical assistance, there's a priority deadline for submitting your pre-application interest form. The priority deadline for those seeking technical assistance is March 5th. So the pre-application interest forms are not scored. They won't impact whether you receive the grant or not. They're used as a point of contact with staff and will provide any initial direction. And also, once you submit your pre-application interest form, then staff, meaning Braden or I, will send you your full application form so you can fully apply for the program. Okay, so like I said, once you submit your pre-application interest form, you'll gain access to your full application materials. We'll also provide you templates of what you need so you understand a little bit more what's required. Okay, so that happens between now and April 23rd. You'll submit your pre-application interest form, and if you're interested in TA, you'll submit it by March 5th. So once you submit your pre-application interest form, you get your full application interest form, which is also due on April 23rd. After April 23rd, it shifts back to our team, and that's where our work begins. Our application review process includes eligibility checks, scoring by an interagency review panel, and then for applicants of large planning grants and large implementation grants, it also includes a final interview for top scoring applicants. After all of this, we aim to make award recommendations this summer of 2024. Also, just a heads up that this year our application and all the ICARP grant applications are taking place on Submittable, which is an online platform. I think it should make the application process a lot easier for folks. It allows all our application materials to be on one website. It's kind of like a Google form if you've ever done one before. Okay, so as we've mentioned in the past slide and throughout our presentation, and if you couldn't already tell, we're really excited to offer technical assistance for round 2 applicants. For round 1 applicants, I'm sorry. Round 1 applicant technical assistance will have priority given to applicants from funding target communities. So again, our funding target communities are California Native American tribes and disadvantaged communities. So the priority is being given to those 2 groups, as well as groups with low capacity generally. Again, if you're interested in receiving application TA, you should submit the pre-application interest form by March 5th, and I'll put a link in the chat for that a little bit later on. So yeah, we encourage you all to apply for technical assistance and take advantage of this opportunity that we're really excited to provide for you all. Okay, a little bit more about our scoring criteria. So once you submit your full application form by April 23rd, you might be wondering how you're going to get awarded. How does this work out? So our grants are made up of 100 points that will be determined by our interagency review panel once we decide that you're an eligible applicant. 20 points are coming from project vision and description. 30 points are coming from narrative questions related to the communities you're serving. It's also important to note that our 7-point scoring bump for our target communities, which is again tribes and disadvantaged communities, is factored in for the communities served. So if you're not a target community, you can get 23 points. And then if you represent a disadvantaged community or a tribe, you can get the full 30 points. 20 points come from our partnership and community engagement section. 10 points come from projects with multiple benefits section. So that's showing how your project, while it's addressing extreme heat, is also touching on other climate emergencies and inequities in your community. 10 points comes from your budget and work plan. So that's going to be an Excel document that you fill out and send back to us to explain your budget and what you plan to do. And it also includes a little opportunity for you to explain your budget a little bit more and give us kind of a tour of where we should be looking at. And then finally, the last point comes from capacity building needs or interview. So what we mean by that is if you're applying for a small planning grant or a large planning grant, you'll write us a couple paragraphs about how this grant could help you build capacity and make future projects stronger. And then if you're an applicant for a large planning grant or a large implementation grant, and you're in our top scoring group, you'll be invited for an interview or a site visit so we can learn more about your project. Okay, so that's kind of the broad overview of how those 100 points are made up. And now we're going to zoom in a little bit more just to give you one example. So this question comes from our project vision and description section, which going back is right here on the top left and is worth 20 points. So this is one question within the project vision and description section. It's worth 7 points, and applicants will have 300 words to explain to us. Just to go over it slowly so that you can see how it works, is the question is, provide a comprehensive overview of the project by clearly describing the key steps and deliverables of the project. So that's what you'll fill out. And then once you submit it, on the other side of things, someone from a different state agency on our review panel will look at your question and compare it to this kind of question that we're asking them about your question, which is, how clear is the description of the project's key steps and deliverables, and to what extent does it provide a comprehensive overview of the project? So basically, we're just asking the same question in reverse back to our people reviewing your application. Okay, I'm not going to read this all, and I don't think you want me to, but this is just kind of a breakdown of how our reviewers will choose your score for each point. So on the bottom, we have low, which is 0 to 2 points, meaning your project description is minimal, lacks clarity, and has limited information. And then we have our medium scoring criteria and our high. So to go over that, we have our big overview, 100 points, and then we break it down into smaller questions, each one having a rubric. So we're hoping all this material will be really useful for you as you're drafting your questions and make it more clear how you can get from submitting an application to being awarded. And all this application materials, including our rubrics, is available in our final guidelines. So I'll go ahead and put a note in the chat there. And with that, I'll pass it to Braden to get started on our question period.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Allie. So there's two ways we're hoping to take questions. There's the question and answer function that's right next to participants on your lower bar. If you have already put a question in the chat, I will do those first, but I would appreciate if all future questions either were using the question and answer function, or if you raise your hand, we will be able to call on you as questions come in. So either please raise your hand or use the question and answer function. So just to clarify, Natalie's question, do you have to meet both DAC and Native American tribes to get all 7 points? It's one or the other. So if you're a tribe, then you'll get 7 points. If you qualify as serving disadvantaged communities, then you'll qualify. So it's not both, it's one or the other, get you that 7 points. To Paul's question, cool home pilot projects have to do with any projects that are supporting residential cooling, so that those could be different types of air conditioning solutions, shade solutions, anything that's helping people stay in their homes during a heat wave and piloting those ideas and methods would qualify under the Cool Home Pilot Project. So any kind of infrastructure supporting homes. Then does this program fund the construction of a community resilience center for rural communities? There are eligible activities to support cooling centers and making sure that there's support for people during a heat wave. So with that, and so construction supporting some type of rural community resilience center, many of the eligible activities that you would need to do that are eligible in our program. Our program, from an infrastructure perspective, is not a very large program. It's really meant, even the large plant implementation grant, from our opinion, is meant more likely to help support existing CIP or construction projects, and not really it's not really enough funding to do a standalone brand new project. And so our hope is that you know, in terms of large scale implementation, that you could add shade structures to a building, add solar and battery and air conditioning and electrical upgrades to a building to support it being a cooling center with community resilience center activities. But the Community Resilience Center program that SGC has is really meant to pay for the full scope of everything that's needed in a community resilience center. Our program is really meant to support everything that's needed for heat relief and resilience to heat. And obviously there's a big Venn diagram, but they're not completely overlapped. And so there is some amount of nuance there. The small planning grants, to Olivia's questions, can be used to support CRCs to the degree that CRCs are being used in that community as a heat relief or resilience to extreme heat solution. So this is an extreme heat and community resilience grant program. It has to fund extreme heat and community resilience efforts. But there is certainly an overlap with CRCs in that, and the planning activities could support CRCs if framed in a way that is demonstrating that you are creating an intervention that's supporting your community with extreme heat. So with that, we've finished the chat, which is great. Thanks for doing that. I don't see any hands raised at this moment, so we can start working through the question and answers and Allie's been putting some of that in the text.
Yeah, I'm going ahead. The really straightforward questions, I'm just answering over chat, and then leaving the ones that might merit further conversation. Braden, if it's helpful, I'm happy to read out some of the questions for you.
I think most of these are straightforward. I do want to sort of add to can you apply for, so we have no limits on what you can apply for as an entity or jurisdiction. And you can definitely apply for both a planning grant and an implementation grant. And especially in this first round, the implementation grants, especially the large implementation grants, are going to be very competitive. So there is an opportunity to apply for a small planning grant, for instance, in addition to applying for a large planning grant in order to receive some funding to continue your work and to get momentum going on your project, even if you don't receive a large planning grant in the first round. But that's a great question, Sully. There's, yeah, regarding eligibility.
I see Mark's hand is raised if you want to come off mute, Mark.
Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I'm interested in promoting the heat relief aspects of extensive to universal use of full coverage solar PV canopies over both parking and driveways to complement rooftop solar, so that the solar PV is meeting the electricity demand for both the building and all the vehicles associated with it. Success in meeting total demand will be made more possible by research and development we are conducting that will result in 2 or more times the conversion efficiency per square foot, for instance, of today's commercial solar PV at significantly lower cost per watt. We will also be making major reductions on the cost of battery storage and will qualify for the $45 per kilowatt hour IRA battery subsidy. And that's off of $60 in the pilot plant or $48 a kilowatt hour in the full mass production plant that we're planning. It's ceramic production, basically, which is how we're able to get it so low. And that will mean it really won't matter how much storage you need. Whatever you need, you'll be able to put in to bridge gaps, storm gaps or whatever. But this is about heat and sun events. We expect that our solar PV thin film will absorb and convert infrared wavelengths early on, along with visible light, and later versions will also convert UV wavelengths, which are also converted to heat, reflected, basically re-emitted back out in most solar today. This is likely to help reduce the urban heat island effect, and it will significantly reduce the heat accumulation in attics and upper floors of rooms, or upper rooms.
Mark, do you have a question?
No, I'm interested in promoting that. I'm interested in whether you see that as a valid complement to your work, and is whether you could, for instance, say, okay, if you've got a PV project, you should get extra points for the heat island effect because this is going to actually reduce the heat. This is gonna take most of the heat energy out of the sun, from 40% up to possibly in a few years, 80% of the energy in the sun would be converted to electricity. And it would be we'd be eliminating the fossil fuels because we'd be powering converted or new electric vehicles, as well as the building. So I'm doing a revolution in energy here, and I'm asking you if you guys can recognize and maybe move some muscle behind the heat mitigation impact of this work.
Yeah, so there's thank you for sharing, and thank you for your question. So there are a lot of different technologies that can help support heat and then have other co-benefits. So in our program, this is a heat program, right? It's not an energy program, but if you are applying to use a technology that has energy benefits, we have that 10 points for co-benefits that, that
Okay.
if there's something that has other co-benefits, the scorers can be like, oh, this is a great investment that supports heat and it has these additional co-benefits.
Yeah.
So we do think, we are hoping that, there's technologies being deployed through the use of this program that have co-benefits in addition to supporting extreme heat. But like we've said before, this is an extreme heat program. And so, our reviewers are going to be looking for applications that address extreme heat primarily for the most vulnerable populations in your area, jurisdiction, or region. And if there are other co-benefits, that's excellent.
Yeah, well,
but
this would, because what we're talking about here is covering entire parking lots, not just the parking spaces, but the driveway and parking lot, entire, which means you've got a whole lot of places. And I've been to Sacramento. I live in San Mateo, and it's nice here in the summer. But I've been to Sacramento and other places where a lot of places in California, the heat is extreme and the sun impact is extreme during the summer. And this will actually create a mass of protected space outside every building, and it can even be extended on the streets. But basically, people are going to have a lot less exposure both in a building and outside the building to direct sunlight, oppressive levels of sunlight and heat. It will also reduce the air temperature, like the shaded air temperature will also be lower because you're not getting as much heat hitting the ground and radiating as direct heat.
Well, thank you so much for sharing, Mark, and we're happy to follow up with you if you have any additional questions. And thanks for sharing here today. Jeff, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks. Quickly, I work for the County Office of Education, and we might have a number of school districts who are interested in both HVAC improvements and shade structures and similar infrastructure. Any of those individual projects are going to be, under $1 million likely, but maybe combined, is there a strategy potentially in combining the projects with one application as opposed to individual applications? And just maybe discuss some thought process around that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've created a program that allows for both options. So if you want to take a single site and make some interventions in a single site, you can use the small planning grant. If you have a very large scale implementation, you want to do it as a single site that isn't going to get covered by $450,000, then you could do a large scale implementation. If you want to take a few different sites and put them together in an implementation, you can use the large scale implementation grant for that. So all are on the table and options.
Super. Thanks.
No worries. Thanks, Jeff. And so, yeah, we've designed the program so that it allows you to do whatever fits your needs the most, whether it's a combined large infrastructure project on multiple sites or a single site. So we can't give you the strategy on how to handle that, but we have created the program that allows you to do both approaches.
And then I'm sorry, while I've got the floor, quick follow-up to that. If we've got just to kind of clarify something that was in one of the questions or the chat, say there's an organization that wants to do an implementation project, but they've also got a separate project they need planning help with. They can file 2 separate applications for that. Is that kind of the direction?
Yes. So there's actually a few options here. So one is that you can use money in a large implementation project for planning. So we have in our grant guidelines that up to 30% of an implementation project can be for planning. So for instance, let's say you wanted to do a large implementation grant that was doing shade and cooling on 3 different sites, but then you also wanted it's 3 different school sites, but that you also wanted to do planning for all of your school sites, then the large planning grant or large implementation grant allows for that. we really feel like as people mature in their work, the lines between planning and implementation blur. You want to be able to implement and then plan more, or you want to be able to plan and do some amount of implementation very quickly. So we're hoping, and that's why we're allowing for some amount of implementation to happen in the large planning grant. So you could use $500,000 to do your large planning grant, and then $200,000 to do tree plantings or shade structures or some type of short implementation project that allows people to see action in your plan immediately. So we really think that this we tried to create a program that supports that hybridization of having some implementation in a planning project or allowing for some planning in a implementation project. And we're hoping, we've created that opportunity for applicants if they choose to take it.
Super. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, Jeff. A. Simpson, Jr., would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you. Name's Alan Simpson, Larry County. My question just kind of concerns how to best link this. The project we're kind of looking at would be, I believe, within the lines of a planning grant. There are co-benefits in the sense that I think this would cover the spectrum, kind of extreme bimodality of heat, and then in our case, potentially flooding as well. But what we're wanting to do is try to apply for a meteorological study. Having done some other FEMA grants and HMA stuff, we're trying to obtain that so we can have some data that's localized and bolster our benefit cost ratio. But just wanting to make sure that would be something that would seemingly be eligible. It seems like that given that spectrum, it might be a bit iffy.
Allie, do you have a thought on that? Did you?
I apologize. I am busy writing answers.
I'm not sure I understand. Yeah. Can you say that one more time, Allie? I'm not sure if I understand what would be iffy about that.
Well, I'm just trying to make sure. I mean, I think the planning basis of it would be justified just because of the data, the way it would be used, and ultimately how it could feed into a hazard mitigation plan or FEMA-related activities.
Yep.
I'm just wanting to make sure that for the purposes of trying to execute a meteorological study and forecast over a period of, say, like 5 to 10 years based on climate change data that's more localized, that might be applicable through this program. I'm trying to make sure that would be something that would work.
Yeah, to me, like when we said that you can use the large planning grant to conduct studies, that would be a study that would be completely a legitimate way of using those funds, because you would be collecting data and having an understanding of some type of forecasting that would then help you with an upcoming planning project integrating into your emergency management planning. Yeah, that's absolutely an eligible activity in my opinion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Great. I can read out some questions from the Q&A to you, Braden, if that helps.
Sure.
Okay, the first question we have in the queue is, for implementation grants that aim to build shaded playgrounds, will the grant cover the cost of elements like playground equipment, lighting, and building ADA sidewalks to access the playground? Or will they only fund heat relieving elements such as shade structures and trees?
So if you're creating a cool playground and your desire is to create a cool refuge that is a playground, you can use that funding to create every element of that playground. Another thing that we've designated is that if you have to do some earth moving to create that playground, or if you have to lay some new electrical or water infrastructure to make that playground, a certain amount of the project cost can be spent on that underlying infrastructure, site readiness to make that playground possible. So the playground itself, the shade structures, all the cooling elements you're adding to the playground, as well as some amount of underlying infrastructure, are all within eligible activities of the grant. Allie.
Yeah, I think that's great. Also, just to add on, another eligible activity that might be helpful here is that essential amenities for things like this are also included. So things like bathroom or lactation rooms are definitely eligible if you were proposing a playground. So hopefully that helps. I think maybe we can do one more question from the Q&A and then move to Natalie and then head back to the Q&A.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the question I'm seeing is, does this program fund the construction of community resilience centers?
Yeah, and I feel like I answered that question before, which is if you have a community resilience center that you believe is going to serve a resilience to heat, extreme heat and heat relief component, and you've had and you're able to fill out the application saying that this intervention, in this case the CRC, is critical to supporting vulnerable communities in your jurisdiction or your area with heat relief, then it would be an eligible activity. It has to be in the confines of being a heat relief intervention, because this is a heat relief and heat resilience grant. So that's how we'll continue to answer that question. Allie, anything you want to add to that?
I think that's great. We can head back to the Q&A, but Natalie, I see your hand is raised if you'd like to ask a question off mute.
Yes, going back to this cool playground idea, I'm glad someone else brought it up. So Client Resolve may be applying for like a cool playground idea. What we found is that the cost of funding like one playground is actually pretty high. And we're trying to like figure out how we can put it into this grant application. And that's why I'm asking questions about like leveraging and match funding. Like if we do have some match funding, but it's like later on, like how do we show that in the grant is like one question I have. And then yeah, like if we apply for $2 million for like the one playground is getting funded $2 million, like half the cost, and then the other playground, we're trying to fund like 2 playgrounds, right? And we want to fund like $2 million for like half the cost of one playground, and then $2 million for another site, right? So 2 sites. Like, could that be something we apply for if we have like the match costs from somewhere else? We're just trying to get like $4 million from this grant.
Yeah, so Natalie, thank you for your question. It is a very good question. I think we want you to be able to apply for the program to fit your needs. If obviously, because it's a limit of $4 million, that are so much that you could do there, we don't require matching funds. If you bring in matching funds, obviously that can help support the project. The other piece of it too is, if you apply for the grant, you work on matching funds, and then the activities change in terms of what you would fund with this grant and what you would fund with other dollars, that's something that could be worked out in the contracting phase. So what would happen there is you would say, okay, we're building X amount of this project and X amount of this project with this total for a large implementation grant of this total amount. And then if those percentages changed in the project post award, then we would then want to know in the contracting phase exactly what it is that our program was funding versus other funding sources. And we're going to want to make sure that there isn't double dipping going on, where you're telling 2 different grant organizations that you're funding the same thing with different money. So that would be sort of a consideration in the contracting phase.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think the idea is that like $4 million can go so far. And so we're trying to figure out what can be done in 30 months and what can give us like the most impact across maybe a couple of locations. Thank you.
No worries. And that's exactly the type of calculus that we're expecting grantees to have to make, is to figure out how do we use this funds to most move forward the work that's needed in our community, and an understanding that with these limited state funds that we have to figure out how, that every grantee is going to need to figure out how to best utilize, these state funds with other opportunities they may have.
Thanks so much, Natalie. Braden, if it's okay with you, I can keep reading out questions from the Q&A. Okay, you're muted, but I think you said yes.
I did say yes.
Okay, sounds good. This question, I like it, and it may take a little while to answer. It says, how does this program support capacity building within organizations, especially those working in historically underinvested areas?
Wait,
I
can
can
you
read it
say
out again. Yeah. Yes, the question is, how does this program support capacity building within organizations, especially organizations working in historically underserved areas? If it's helpful, I can take a first pass also.
Yeah, do you want to take a first pass?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the primary way we've built capacity building into the grant, which we're really excited about, is through our small planning and small implementation grants. Particularly our small planning grant, capacity building is an eligible activity that you can have funded, which means that theoretically an entire grant could be based on capacity building for extreme heat. This can look like a variety of things. It can look like partnership development, it can look like staff training, it can look at scoping to see who needs to be at the table. So that's just one way that capacity building is developed in our grant. But we also are hoping to make it kind of a theme throughout. We're encouraging folks to set aside specific amounts of funding for trainings and things like that, regardless of their grant type. And then on the other side of things, focusing on those who are working in historically underinvested areas. As we mentioned with our funding targets, and we have another kind of I forget exactly our term, but we're focusing on hopefully really honing in on grants that are working in historically underinvested areas through our scoring criteria. So I guess the answer being, we're excited to make capacity building an eligible activity in a variety of forms, and specifically focusing on those in historically underinvested areas. The other thing I'd add before I pass it to Braden is, we're hoping to support historically underinvested areas by providing application technical assistance to make the grant more accessible to these folks. So definitely, if you're interested in applying and represent a historically underinvested area, or we're kind of going, the similar term is disadvantaged community for our grant, certainly encourage you to apply to receive application technical assistance to get support even before we make any awards. Braden, I'll pass it to you.
Great, thanks, Allie. Yeah, that's exactly right. So especially on the small planning grant side, but also in the small implementation side, if you're an organization that hasn't done extreme heat work before, but you want to start doing extreme heat, either planning or start a small program and see where it grows, one, we have the funding to allow you to start. And then to Allie's point, we have TA available for you to apply. There also is going to be a technical assistant program for awardees. And so we'll have support both from our office and from third-party providers to help you work with heat data, for help you with project management, to help you with your budgets, to help you to help folks to support the implementation of the projects themselves. So we have really tried to design this program so that organizations that work in disadvantaged communities or historically underrepresented communities have resources to work on extreme heat. And we're open to continuing to figure out how to mature the program so that it does that in as high a quality way as possible. And yeah, if you have any additional, go ahead.
Nope, I was just going to say thanks for your question and thanks for your answer, Braden. Edgar, I see your hand is up if you'd like to come off mute.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for hosting this. I had two quick questions. They're very general. In some of the experience in applying through some of the programs at OPR may be different, I guess, in these ICARP grants. Some of the feedback that we received was about the specificity of the project. So my question is, how general or how specific do you have to be in the application about the specificity of the project, whether it's the planning or implementation? And then two, another feedback that we've received from OPR staff, again, this is other grants, it's not this grant program, but just a general question. If there is an expert, right, or an expert or a jurisdiction, or how important are partnerships as it relates to expertise in climate or extreme heat, or having an entity like a public entity as part of the partnership process. So hopefully those questions make sense.
Yeah, thanks, Edgar. I'll start, and then Allie, you can fill in. So, and Allie did go over our partnership requirements. So, especially for the large grants, there are those partnership requirements. We do, I mean, the grant itself, you saw the scoring criteria and you saw the matrix that reviewers are going to use. So there is an expectation that you're going to describe what your grant activities are, what your grant is doing, who it serves, and how they're going to be, how you're going to advance heat relief and resilience to extreme heat in your community. So the application is going to require you to be specific about how your program or infrastructure project or planning project does that. And the TA providers also will be able to help support applicants in trying to get to that level of specificity and having those strong narratives that are able to tell that story. That are able to tell that story. Trying to remember the multiple parts of your question. So, Allie, did you have anything else from the question that you wanted to jump in with, or?
I think you did a great job. Edgar, I know that we might have missed a component of your question related to partnerships. Would you be able to restate it?
Oh yeah, just for the partnership, the importance of having, I know for the larger grants definitely, but as you develop, I guess having a public entity or the partnership that's developed is, how essential is that? And then if there are components of the second question is if there are components of expert matter, right? In whether it's climate change or data or however that is, that also must be or included, right? Part of it is in the application. That makes sense. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I can definitely answer the first part of your question about the importance of partnerships. I guess I would start by saying it's really important to note that partnership requirements vary based on whether you're applying for a small grant or a large grant. So if you're applying for a small grant, you're welcome to apply with a co-applicant, but it's also totally okay if you don't have a co-applicant. And in lieu of a co-applicant, you can explain to us how you plan to develop partnerships through your grant activities that we're funding. On the other side of things, for our large planning grants, we really prefer that folks apply with a co-applicant. Specifically, if you are a lead applicant representing a local public aid entity or an academic institution, we prefer that you partner with a community-based organization. And if you're a community-based organization lead applicant, we prefer that you partner with a local public entity or academic institution. The really important thing to note there is for large planning grants and large implementation grants, tribes, it's totally okay if tribes do not have a co-applicant. We understand that oftentimes they operate kind of independently, so it wouldn't totally make sense. In terms of the importance of a partnership, it might be helpful to state that I think 20 out of our 100 points come directly from partnership questions. So that might give you a little bit of a sense of how we'll be scoring partnership. Anything to add on there, Braden?
No, I think that's a strong point. So a fifth of the scoring has to do with the quality of your partnerships. So partnerships are clearly an important part of the grant, and especially an important part of the grant for large planning and large implementation projects.
Great. And then just on the point about expert input, you're definitely welcome to have experts help with your grant application and advise. But we want to make it really clear that anyone is encouraged to apply for the grant. You don't need to have expert information on extreme heat. You don't need to have any particular expert data. We're definitely not requiring that. We will ask you in your grant application how your community is impacted by extreme heat, and we encourage the use of pretty elementary data tools. But we're certainly not asking for expert level data or expert level information on extreme heat. Does that sound correct to you, Braden?
Yes.
Cool. Okay. I know we're getting a little close on time, but I'll just read out a couple of the questions remaining so we can make sure we get to everybody. This question might be a little difficult to answer, but I'll read it out anyways. Can you provide insights into the key elements that successful grant applications typically include? Are there any specific formatting or documentation requirements that applicants should pay close attention to?
Allie, you may have thoughts on this. So in terms of submittable, it's basically a cloud-based platform that allows you to submit your text into required fields. And so the formatting, it's not like you have a Word document that has to be sent to us and formatted a certain way. The formatting is all what you submit into the fields into submittable. There are some areas where we're asking for like you to upload your work plan or upload PDFs. So and we have templates for the budget. We have templates for the work plan. So there are some existing templates that we ask you to use and follow the instructions in those templates. Anything else to add there, Allie, with that?
Yeah, I think you did a great job. I guess just to add on, one of our hopes with Submittable is that it will alleviate any of those formatting or documentation concerns. Luckily, you won't be able to submit your application until you submit the right documents because it's required questions in Submittable. So I'm hoping that you won't need to worry too much about that. In terms of key elements of successful grant applications, unfortunately, that's a little bit hard to answer because this is our first round of funding. So far, we've had no successful grant applicants because we haven't awarded anybody. But looking forward to answering that question better once we make some awards and find some key themes for successful applicants. Anything to add, Braden?
Well, no. I mean, one thing that we are doing with this, yes, to answer Natalie's questions, you only see the budget work plan, the templates, once you receive a full application. You only receive a full application once you've submitted an interest form. Ellie, did I get that right?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
Oh, go for it, Braden.
no, I'm good.
Okay. Another question I'm seeing is, would a public tree report or assessment and development of a tree master plan for a city be eligible under a large planning grant?
Yeah, urban forestry, because of the impact that it has on cooling, certainly can is an eligible activity in terms of the planning activities. I think that there are things that we've seen happen in around the country of how urban forestry plans can be augmented or thought about really to achieve extreme heat goals. So whether that's adding an urban forestry plan and combining green stormwater infrastructure, or thinking about doing a shade plan that is both mechanical shade and urban forestry. So a standalone urban forestry plan is an eligible activity, but there's also ways to sort of think. One of the things we said in the values of our program is that we want you to be thinking systemically. And so what that would mean is like that you're doing an urban forestry plan, but you're thinking about the energy savings that's coming from the trees, that you're thinking about how to do it in a water responsible way, that you're thinking about how to integrate your tree plan with your transportation system. So I think I just want that sort of caveat to, would we fund a traditional urban forestry plan? Yes, it's an eligible activity. Are there ways to make sure that an urban forestry plan really truly meets the goals and values of this program? I think that there's ways to augment what a traditional urban forestry plan traditionally does and have it really try to achieve a more comprehensive list of the values and goals that we've stated in this program.
Thanks, Braden. Another question I'm seeing from Olivia is, what sort of at-home cooling interventions are eligible activities? For example, could a local government apply to create a program to increase access to cooling at home, such as building upgrades or purchase of heat pumps or AC?
heat pumps, AC, other interventions that could support in-home cooling are eligible activities.
The only thing I'd add on there is do take note that if you plan to do significant infrastructure in people's homes, these people will, once you are awarded, they'll have to submit some degree of site control and proof that you as local government will be able to come into their home and do this, and that they'll be able to keep the intervention there for a specific amount of time. We aren't requiring this up front because we understand you likely wouldn't know exactly whose home you're putting it into. But do keep it in your mind that you'll need to demonstrate site control if you're doing significant infrastructure upgrades on private property.
Great point, Allie.
Okay, another question I'm seeing from Kai is, we have several facilities. Should we submit one application per facility, or should we submit one application for each of the facilities? I think what Kai means is, we have several facilities. Should we submit separate applications for each facility or combine into one application?
Yeah, and like I answered when I answered a similar question earlier, the program is designed for you to take either approach. And so you either can submit individually, either in the small program or in the large program, or you can combine projects. We're sort of agnostic to your approach. What I would say is that filling out one of these applications is going to be quite a bit of work, and you're really going to want to make an argument about how this particular infrastructure investment is supporting your most vulnerable communities with heat relief or long-term resilience to heat. And so maybe there's an opportunity to look at your infrastructure projects where you need the most help and say, where are we the most vulnerable? Who absolutely needs this type of intervention? Who absolutely needs these resources and is the most vulnerable? And that might help you winnow down what it makes sense to put, the full resources of a high quality application behind. But we're not limiting you to what you can put in, but that's something you need to think about as an applicant, I would say.
Great. Another question from Frank is, can submissions be made for both a small scale extreme heat and community resilience planning grant and also an adaptation planning grant?
Yeah, so I wasn't exactly clear if Frank was talking about the adaptation planning grant program. Yeah, it sounds like Frank is, in which case you can apply to the adaptation planning grant program, and you can apply to our program. There's separate criterias, there's separate planning processes, and it's totally fine if you take a very similar concept and apply to both programs. You're not conflicted out of doing that.
Great. And to answer the other part of Frank's question, can project contributors, supporters, and co-applicants be based out of California? We received the same question from someone else, and I'm looking into it. What I can say for certain is local governments, tribes, and academic institutions need to be based in California. Whether a community-based organization with an operating address outside of California that serves Californians can join on is something I'm not sure about. So Frank, if you could provide your email, I can reach out to you, and I'll also reach out to the other person that asked the question. Anything to add on there, Braden?
No, we do need to follow up and figure out, both for supporters and for CBOs, whether they're allowed to have outside addresses.
Great. Okay, and then one more question from Anastasia. Some grants provide access to Q&A, answers, and questions from all applicants. Do you have a shared document where we can access Q&A, questions, and answers from all applicants? I can start and then pass it to you, Braden. So far, our plan is to post all these recordings online and put a link to it on our website. We haven't developed a plan yet to add all our questions Q&A in a document form because we're having them in recording form. But definitely noted that that's something you'd be interested in, and we can consider it. Anything else, Braden?
No, that's good.
Great. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions, and we're running a little bit low on time, but happy to give it a minute or two more just in case there's anything else.
Yes, Edgar, and then we'll need to go to the next thing.
Yeah, just real quick, I was wondering, I saw on the website that there are multiple workshops and some to be determined. Are they going to be basically the same information? Sharing it for other partners. I just came today, but I'm saying for other partners in the area and sharing more information about this grant for other um organizations that may consider applying in this area. So just wondering if it was going to be the same content for the next couple of weeks. Thank you.
What an amazing segue to the next part of our work. So next week, so the answer is that last week and this week are the only ones that are sort of these general sessions that we're going to be starting to move into content areas where we go deeper into different type of grants and where we have national best practices presenting. So next week, we're going to be going into more detail on the implementation grants, and we're going to be reviewing some of the types of implementation presentations that we'll be getting in the coming weeks. And then on the 28th, we have confirmed Aaron Granas Holmes, who's worked on the Keep DC Cool plan. So that's really an example of a large, what would be considered, this is the cooling plan, heat resilience plan for Washington, D.C. So this is really what would be considered a large planning grant. So Aaron's going to present on that. But then we have City of San Antonio that's going to come to talk about their cool pavement and heat governance work. City of Phoenix, City of Tucson, and some smaller community, some work done on a green stormwater infrastructure plan for Lake Havasu City in Arizona. So we're going to be having many more sessions that then have those teaching components, our learning components. We also will be getting into more detail on specific grant types. And then as this curriculum goes on up until the due date of the grant, we will also have our third-party TA provider come to some of the sessions for open office hours, as well as for very specific TA on specific issues. So when you sign up and put in your notice or intend to apply form what some of your TA needs are, we're going to look at that and then potentially augment some of the curriculum of these workshops to help support the needs that we're seeing from the intent to apply forms. But before March 5th, we'll be doing we'll be bringing in these outside speakers, and we're really excited about our ability to be able to do that. Next, so thanks, great question, Edgar. And so please pass this on. This is basically going to be continuing. So if you have project partners that you want to have learn more, we're always going to start these sessions with a short general overview, and then we'll get into the more details that we say we are going to get into with each session. But if you have project partners or people that you think might be interested in this grant, absolutely let them know about the workshops. And they won't all be the same format as today. Allie, anything to add to that?
No, I'm really grateful that you all came today, and hopefully you enjoyed it enough to join us for another one soon.
Great. So you can find us at our OPR emails, which are here up on the screen. Don't hesitate to reach out. Also, please, those of you that are interested in moving forward, fill out an intent to apply form. As Allie said, those wanting TA really need to turn in those wanting technical assistance for their grant application really need to turn those notice to our intent to apply forms by March 5th. So thank you so much for being here today. Thanks so much for your interest in the program, for the work that you're doing in communities across the state, and look forward to staying in dialogue with you about this work.